One of the kind of direct results of that shutdown is the announcement that we've gotten from the Federal Aviation Administration and the Transportation Department that, hey, like, we're going to have to cut flight capacity at certain airports because we don't have enough air traffic controllers showing up to safely direct flights. I think you're going to see the same thing happen here is, as these delays and these cancellations cascade, I think you're going to see Congress feel pressure to act. I think the shutdown will be over by next week. Welcome to this bonus episode of Market Outsiders. It's Thursday, November 6th. The FAA has just announced that it's going to be cutting flight volumes at 40 airports around the country. It's 10 a.m. Eastern right now as we're recording this, and we don't yet have the list of airports that are going to be affected, but we can make guesses just based on some of the slowdowns and delays that we've seen over the last few weeks. This is a result of staffing shortages due to the ongoing government shutdown. And we're here today just to talk about how you respond to government policy as a business leader. I think that's important for any aspiring business leader to understand that you have to be aware of what's happening in the public policy realm. You cannot be an ostrich with your head stuck in the sand and just expect to go on running your business and be unaware and ignorant about what's happening in the policy realm. It's important for you to know. And in certain businesses, it's really important for you to be engaged in the policymaking process. And we're just going to talk about what's happening. And then we're also going to talk about if we were running an airline, how we would respond. Because what's happening for United, Delta, American, Southwest, and other airlines is that their capacity is being cut. And it's not a choice that they're making. There's an external force that's saying you must cut your capacity. And some airlines are going to be affected more than others just based on which airports see these slowdown orders. And so we're just going to talk about if you are forced to make capacity cuts as an airline, how you go through the process of making those decisions on a really short timeline. Because these airports are going to start seeing traffic slowdowns tomorrow. And so we're going to find out today which airports are affected. And then starting tomorrow, Friday, November 7th, you're going to see a cut down on flights coming in and out of those airports. And so these airlines have 24 hours to respond and decide which flights get delayed, which flights get canceled, how you reroute. It's going to be a big logistical nightmare, and people are going to be working overtime at these airlines over the next day to figure it out. And so let's start here. Jenny Ray, do you just want to give us maybe a 1-minute overview of what a government shutdown is and why the government is shut down? And then we can dive into some of those specifics.
Great. Awesome. So one of the functions of Congress is to produce a budget. They hold the power of the purse. When they do not have an agreed upon budget or a continuing resolution to operate on a prior budget that gives them the ability to continue to negotiate the new budget, then the government cannot function. Doesn't mean that the air traffic controllers who are currently stepping off of the job are unable to receive pay. It just means that they're not receiving it right now. And that has real world implications because if I have a mortgage and a private school purchase and a car payment and I need to make those, they're not waiting for the government to pay me. They're expecting their payment on time in full. And so a lot of people are kind of saying, look, if I'm not getting paid, then I'm not sure that I'm going to come to work. I don't think that it's a fair exchange. And that's why we're seeing air traffic control, which is quite a specialized field, being affected. But of course, areas across the U.S. government affected as well. And it's generally recognized that shutdowns are good for no one. Shutdowns are not good for the business community. They're not good for the government. It's, for those businesses that rely on payments of the hundreds of thousands of federal workers. Those are really big implications. Obviously, people that are on SNAP benefits, et cetera. So there are a lot of people that are affected when the power of the purse closes the purse. And that's kind of where we are right now. Now we're in the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, I believe, Naman. And one of the things that I think is important just to understand, again, it's important for you to understand how to talk about government in a non-political way. And so in a non-political way, here's what's happening. We have a slight Republican majority in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Their goal has been to do one of two things: pass a new budget or pass a continuing resolution to open the government, which is significantly easier. A deal would likely be a continuing resolution. And that continuing resolution will require either of the two sides to capitulate something, at least temporarily. And I think this is the most likely way that we get to this negotiation. So in just a second, I know you're going to talk about what you think about the government shutdown. Is it good politics and good policy? And then how, because of that, would you respond as a leader? But I just wanted to explain that the most likely scenario is that you will see moderates on one or both sides come together to negotiate a future agreement about something that is likely to happen going forward. You won't see hardliners on either one of the sides of the political aisle agree to that, but they won't necessarily be required to get a continuing resolution vote passed. There are very few votes that are needed to actually get the government reopened. And we are, I think, at a point where we're seeing a couple of things that might actually get us to that point. So feel free to ask follow-up questions, but I just wanted to give a very basic architecture of where we are and why. Well, actually, let me just explain one quick thing on that too. On the Republican side, one of the sticking points is in the one big beautiful bill and the budget that will fall out of that, this next budget, the goal is to erase subsidies that were architected during COVID through COVID stimulus spending, which directly led to the inflationary pressure that we saw right after that. And to revoke some of those subsidies. The most prominent ones in the news have been around healthcare, but that's not the only kind of subsidy that is being negotiated out in that bill. On the Republican side, their fiscal responsibility is kind of the core architect of what they're talking about. On the Dem side, they're saying, hey, we want those subsidies back. And that sticking point is largely one of the reasons that we do not have a continuing resolution agreed upon so far.
I think that's a good overview of what's happening and why it's happening. I'll just reiterate one thing that you said is that the government cannot spend money that Congress has not authorized it to spend. That's what it means for Congress to have the power of the purse. And so the government's fiscal year starts on October 1st. And so if you do not have a budget or a continuation of a prior budget in place by October 1st, well, then the government lacks authority to spend additional money. And that is why we're in a government shutdown. So the money exists, but there's no authority or authorization to spend it. And so until Congress authorizes that spend, we cannot have a fully functioning government. And so that's what's happening right now. And one of the kind of direct results of that shutdown is the announcement that we've gotten from the Federal Aviation Administration and the Transportation Department that, hey, like we're going to have to cut flight capacity at certain airports because we don't have enough air traffic controllers showing up to safely direct flights. And so, look, to me, this is good policy, right? Like, you better safe than sorry. You've had air traffic controllers working 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts a day for the last month. They have not been paid for the last month. They're thinking about how to put food on the table. They're thinking about making their mortgage payment and their car payment. And you're starting to see the vacancy rates rise as like these folks unfortunately have to go drive Uber or deliver DoorDash to like generate immediate income to meet their obligations. And so you have reduced staffing on the air traffic controller side. You have reduced staffing on the TSA side as well. And so what the Transportation Department is saying is, look, we don't believe that we can safely facilitate the 40,000 flights a day that fly in the United States. And so we're going to have to put a cap on that number to ensure public safety. I think that's good policy. I'd rather make this decision sooner rather than later. I don't want like an air traffic controller like on day 6 of like a week-long shift who's like tired, who's stressed, who's thinking about their family at home on top of like their very stressful job, making a mistake because they're being asked to do too much. And so I think it's good policy for public safety. I also think it's good politics, to be honest with you, because it really drives home the impact of the government shutdown. And it puts pressure on Congress to act, because you have on any given day, almost 1% of the US population flying. You have between 2 to 3 million people flying a day. And so you have like a sizable chunk of the population that's experiencing the same friction every single day. And it's being messaged that you're experiencing this friction because the government shut down. And so I think it's good politics as well to put some pressure on Congress. It's widely acknowledged that the last government shutdown in, I want to say 2018 or 19, was ended when air traffic controllers stopped showing up for work. And when you had cascading flight delays and cancellations, Congress started to hear an earful from their constituents. And what do you know? They came to an agreement. And so I think you're going to see the same thing happen here is, as these delays and these cancellations cascade, I think you're going to see Congress feel pressure to act. I think the shutdown will be over by next week. And I think that this is just like a very visual kind of effect of the lack of government funding.
Nuan, let's talk a little bit about what a business leader should be doing in a time like this. Now, obviously, Delta, United, American et cetera, they all have really significant lobbying presences in DC already, direct relationships with lawmakers and their constituents in those areas, and also direct relationships with the White House. So, can you talk a little bit about what you think both has been going on behind the scenes and what may even change in the next few days based on how they're navigating leadership through this period? Because not only are they responsible for the safety of their aircraft, but they're also financially responsible for the performance of their airlines. They have crew, and they're kind of co-opted into the government airspace and the regulations thereof. So can you just talk a little bit about what the expectations can be about both what they probably have already been doing and what they may do in the future, and what leadership lessons we can take away from that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two ways you have to think about it. Number one is advocacy, and number two is like operational readiness. And so on the advocacy side, I think they've been pushing the White House, they've been pushing their relationships on both sides of the aisle in Congress to reopen the government. And these are apolitical organizations. Like, they care about what's best for them, not necessarily like politics. And so what's best for them is that the government reopen so that air traffic can resume at its like normal pace and cadence. And so the easiest way that they see to get that is a continuing resolution. So that's what they've been advocating for in Washington, D.C. is like, hey, let's go ahead and vote for funding levels that were already in place last fiscal year. Let's continue them for, 30, 60, 90 days so that we can start paying air traffic controllers again. Like, that's what these airlines care about. That's what they've been advocating for. So that's what's happening in the lobbying shops in DC and in the government affairs kind of teams inside of these airlines. Now, operational readiness.
Can I add one thing in
Sure.
here before you go to operational readiness? I just want to highlight that it's important to note the timing of this. They've been advocating for it already, but it has come to a frenzied pace right now because we are weeks away from the peak
From holiday season.
From holiday travel. And Thanksgiving week is the largest travel week. The largest number of TSA entries will be processed during that week in the entire year. And so they are accelerating it. And one of the things that you often have to do for moderates in government is provide them with some kind of air cover. So if it hasn't gotten bad enough yet, the airlines very well may be in agreement for a short schedule cut in order to accelerate the actual reopening of government through the entire holiday season. I think it's important for people to note just the timing and the negotiation, and the fact that like you would assume that airlines would have been negotiating this all along, but the specific timing may be very much in agreement with and in accordance with the airlines. They're not just responding to, they're also participating in the timing, because to provide that air cover, to provide a reason for those moderates to go back to their constituents and say, hey, I had to agree to this because we can't let people miss Thanksgiving with their families, is an emotional appeal that a lot of lawmakers need in order to get these kinds of deals done.
If you run a small or medium-sized business, you know how fast cyber risks are evolving. That's why I use Nord products myself. And for businesses, there's Nord Stellar. It's a threat exposure management platform that helps you spot cyber threats before they become full-blown incidents. Nord Stellar combines data breach and dark web monitoring, attack surface management, and cyber squatting protection, all in one platform. It gives you real-time visibility into leaked credentials, exposed assets, and impersonation attempts so you can act before attackers do. Think of it as seeing what hackers see and fixing it first. Right now, Nord Stellar has an exclusive Black Friday offer. Unlock 20% off with code BLACKFRIDAY20, but only until December 10th, 2025. Visit nordstellar.com/simplified to secure your business today.
Now, we have just a couple of minutes left, and so I just want to talk about, like, hey, if I run an airline, how would I be thinking about where I cut? And
Yeah.
I think, to me, what I would be doing is I'd be cutting regional routes, and I'd be cutting non-hub routes. And so what I mean by that is, like, I'd be taking a look at, like, my planes. Okay, where do I have, like, where are my smaller planes flying to and from? Where am I going to affect the least number of customers? Because, like, as a customer of an airline, even if it's the government's fault, even if it's a government shutdown effect, if you cancel my flight or delay my flight, then that reflects poorly on your brand. And I'm not going to blame the government. I'm going to blame United, right? I'm not going to blame the government. I'm going to blame Southwest. So there's like real reputational risk for these airlines.
Yeah.
And so how do you limit that risk and that damage? Well, you cut flights that are operating on the smallest planes and that are operating from like your non-core markets. And so unfortunately, like, I think what that means is like your flights from smaller cities, your flights that are half full are going to be affected first, not your like Chicago to New York route. Right, where you've got like higher paying customers, you have like half the cabin is business class anyways, right? Like it's a hub to hub route. Like you need those planes to go. Like in a hub and spoke operational model, like you need your hubs to continue to operate as smoothly as possible because it affects the rest of your network if they don't. And so it's like if I was sitting there at one of these airlines thinking about, okay, how do we manage these capacity constraints? That's the kind of decision making that I'd be thinking about first is, okay, smaller jets, regional routes, and like non-hub routes. Anything you'd add to that, Jenny Ray, or do you disagree with that calculus?
I don't at all. And I think that it's important to note it's not because the air traffic control is likely to be affected in some of those smaller cities. It's more that you need the capacity to be constrained in the large cities, right? So you need those planes not to come in and out of those places. So just
Yes.
so that folks understand. But I actually wanted to add another piece. I think you already touched on this, but operational readiness doesn't only involve internal, it's external, it's customer facing. And so operational readiness is how are you going to provide for the messaging to your customers. And let's assume it's this weekend and week. I have a scheduled flight tomorrow. And I'm fully expecting that when my flight is delayed or potentially canceled and consolidated with another one, that friction is something that I'm familiar with as a very frequent traveler. Not everyone is. And so there will be immediate accommodations, extra staffing for the phone banking and the in-airport customer service, potentially credits. So, hey, we had to cancel your flight. And you can blame somebody, like you said, all that you want, but a credit is a very inexpensive way to pacify a customer. And so you'll see miles and free tickets being given out over the next couple of days. But there is an entire customer service facing operation that will also be critical for this.
Well, there you have it. That's just a quick 15-minute rundown of what's happening in air travel, how some of these airlines are going to be thinking about responding to government policy. If you're flying this week or this weekend and you're affected, let us know in the comments, shoot us an email. If you work in the airline industry and you've got a different perspective, let us know as well. But if you're a business leader, you cannot have your head in the sand and be unaware of what's happening in Washington, D.C., because a lot of not just airlines, but business in general is shaped by the regulatory policy that's coming from government. And so you have to be aware of what's happening. If you've got a different perspective, again, go ahead and share that with us. But we wish you safe travels this week and this holiday season. And I think we're all hoping the shutdown ends very, very soon.